Imagine this. You're standing alone on the deck of an ancient ship, surrounded by nothing but the endless, dark sea. The sky is a deep shade of black, with clouds swirling ominously above. The waves crash relentlessly against the hull, their sound echoing in the empty space, and there's a mist hanging in the air, so thick you can barely see a few feet in front of you. It's silent, too silent. Only the ship's old wood creaks, like whispers from another time. There's an unsettling feeling that the ocean itself is alive, watching, waiting. No, have you ever heard of a ghost ship? A ship lost to the sea, cursed to drift in eternal darkness, carrying the souls of sailors who vanished without a trace. I want to know, where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below, and let's dive into a tale that has terrified sailors for generations. They say this story began over a century ago. A ship, known as the Sea Widow, disappeared one stormy night without a trace. It was a vessel feared by even the bravest sailors. Her crew was known for taking on voyages to the most treacherous waters, through storms and high tides, laughing in the face of danger. But one night, everything changed. Just as they crossed into a stretch of sea known as the Devil's Breath, thick fog rolled in, thicker than anything they'd ever seen. Shadows moved in the mist, but no one could tell what they were. Some said they saw faces, others heard faint, chilling whispers calling them by name. One by one, the crew members started to go mad. They claimed to see things no one else could, visions of lost souls, and phantom lights flickering just beyond reach. Even the captain, a man who was rumored to have survived the worst storms, was shaken. They say he locked himself in his cabin, clutching an old faded letter. A letter from a sailor long lost to the sea. Days turned into weeks, and the fog never lifted. Supplies dwindled, hope faded, and soon, all that was left on the Sea Widow was fear, and the strange haunting melody that seemed to come from the sea itself. No one knows for sure what happened next, but one thing is certain. The ship was found drifting years later, empty, with no sign of life on board. And yet, if you find yourself out on the water late at night, some claim you can still hear the sound of their voices carried on the wind. They say the lost crew of the Sea Widow is still searching for a way back, waiting for someone to join them in the endless dark abyss of the sea. Years passed, but the legend of the Sea Widow haunted every sailor who dared to venture into those waters. Some dismissed it as an old sailor's tale, nothing more than a story meant to scare newcomers. But others, well, they swore by its truth. Fishermen claimed to have seen a ship covered in seaweed and barnacles, drifting silently through the mist. Its sails were torn, the wood rotting, but from afar, they could make out faint figures moving across the deck. Those brave or foolish enough to get close reported hearing whispers, voices calling them by name, pleading, warning them to turn back. One night, a young sailor named Lucas from New England set sail with his crew on a mission to uncover the truth. Lucas was known for his courage, even a touch of arrogance, as he laughed off the stories of ghost ships and curses. But as they neared the Devil's Breath, a heavy silence fell over the crew. The water stilled, the sky darkened, and a thick fog rose from the sea, just as the old stories had said. As they pressed forward, something caught Lucas's eye. There, through the mist, a figure stood on a ship's deck, watching them, its eyes empty, hollow, staring straight into Lucas's soul. A sudden chill swept over him, and for the first time, he felt the cold grip of fear. His crewmates, who had been laughing only moments before, fell silent, transfixed by the ghostly vessel that appeared just meters away. The crew couldn't look away. The ship was unlike any they had seen. The wood seemed ancient, twisted, covered in strange markings, and the sails were a deep, sickly shade of gray. It was the Sea Widow. Lucas could hardly believe it, but the proof was right there, staring back at him. Just as he thought to turn back, the faint sound of a melody floated through the air. A haunting, sorrowful tune, like the echo of an old sailor's song. It seemed to come from all around them, wrapping them in its dark embrace. Suddenly, voices whispered through the mist, growing louder with each second. Lucas heard his name, spoken in a voice he didn't recognize, but it felt familiar, as if he'd heard it before. The whispers became pleading, desperate, as if the voices were trapped souls calling out for help. Then, a deep voice cut through the noise, chilling Lucas to his core. It was the captain's voice, low and filled with sorrow. "Leave this place," it said. "We're cursed, and now, so are you." Panic swept through the crew as the fog thickened, surrounding them until they could no longer see the horizon. The whispers grew louder, merging into screams that echoed around them. Lucas tried to move, but his feet felt like they were frozen to the deck. The haunting faces of lost souls floated past him, their eyes wide with terror, as if they were reliving their last, horrifying moments on the Sea Widow. Then, as quickly as it had come, the fog began to lift. The whispers faded, and the ghostly ship vanished, leaving Lucas and his crew trembling, staring into the empty sea. But something was different. Each of them felt marked, as if the shadows had left a piece of their curse behind. They turned the ship around, desperate to escape, but even as they sailed away, they could still hear the faint echoes of the cursed crew, their pleas fading into the distance. "Now, tell me, if you were in Lucas's place, would you turn back? Or would curiosity pull you forward, deeper into the unknown?" Days passed after Lucas and his crew returned to port, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them back. Strange things began to happen on their ship. Tools would go missing, ropes would untie themselves, and each night they'd hear faint footsteps echoing on the deck, as if unseen figures were pacing restlessly. One night, Lucas awoke to a cold breeze sweeping through his cabin. At the foot of his bed, he saw a figure, a man, dressed in tattered clothes with skin as pale as the fog that had surrounded the Sea Widow. The figure's eyes were hollow, lifeless, staring deep into Lucas as if piercing through his soul. It opened its mouth, and a voice, raspy and broken, whispered, "You were warned, but you didn't listen." Lucas tried to shout, but his voice was frozen in his throat. The figure stepped closer, reaching out a hand as cold as ice, leaving Lucas paralyzed in his bed, feeling the weight of something ancient and dark pressing down on him. As the ghostly figure faded, it left behind a chilling message. "The curse is now yours to bear." From that night on, Lucas's life changed. Shadows seemed to follow him everywhere he went. Even in broad daylight, he'd catch glimpses of figures just out of sight, watching, waiting. His dreams became nightmares, each one more vivid than the last, filled with the haunting voices of the cursed crew, begging for release, calling him back to the sea. Desperate, Lucas sought out the oldest sailors in the port, hoping someone might know how to break the curse. He met an old man who had heard whispers of the legend, a man who claimed to have once seen the Sea Widow himself and lived to tell the tale. The man leaned in close and told Lucas in a hushed tone, "Once marked, the only way to break the curse is to return to where it began. You must find the Sea Widow again and face the spirits that dwell within it." But there was a catch. Lucas had to go alone. without his crew. The spirits demanded only him, the one who had dared to look upon the cursed ship with arrogance. Reluctantly, Lucas agreed, knowing it was his only chance to free himself from the relentless hauntings that had taken over his life. And so he set out once more into the unknown, back to the waters that had nearly swallowed him. Night fell, and as the fog closed in around his small boat, Lucas felt a familiar chill crawl up his spine. Shadows twisted and shifted in the mist, forming ghostly figures on the waves. The haunting melody began to play again, louder this time, pulling him deeper into the dark waters until, through the fog, he saw it. The Sea Widow, waiting, its sails torn but standing tall like a phantom of the sea. As Lucas climbed aboard, the whispers started again, louder and more desperate, filling the air with cries of those who had been lost for centuries. The captain's voice echoed above the others, cold and hollow. "You should have heeded our warning. Now you are one of us." With every step, Lucas felt the weight of the curse growing, sinking into his bones, making it harder to breathe, harder to move. He called out, pleading for mercy, for freedom from the ship's haunting grip. But there was only silence, and the endless, piercing stares of the cursed crew. Now here's the question. If you had been warned, would you have returned to the ship? Or would you have tried to live with the curse, knowing it might drive you to madness? Tell us in the comments. And remember, if you ever find yourself at sea, beware the ghostly whispers that drift across the waves. You never know what lies waiting in the fog. Lucas's breath came in ragged gasps as he walked the deck of the Sea Widow, each step making him feel as if he were sinking deeper into a bottomless pit. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, the kind that chilled to the bone. Around him, the shadows of long-lost sailors emerged from the mist, their faces frozen in eternal agony, their hollow eyes fixed on him with a silent, haunting accusation. He called out to them, his voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" But the only response was the eerie, slow creaking of the ship's wood, as if the vessel itself was alive, responding to his question. The captain's ghostly figure materialized before him, his eyes empty, yet full of something dark and unfathomable. With a voice like a distant echo, the captain spoke. "You sought the truth. Now you'll know the price." Without warning, the deck shifted beneath Lucas, and he felt as if the ship was pulling him downward, dragging him into its cursed depths. He stumbled, trying to keep his balance, but the mist around him thickened, almost alive, pressing in from all sides. The faint sounds of screaming filled the air, cries of sailors who had been trapped here for centuries, echoing through the void. It felt as if the very souls of the lost were reaching out, clawing at him, desperate to escape their prison. As he looked around, Lucas's mind began to fracture. Memories that weren't his flashed before his eyes, scenes of betrayal, storms, violent deaths, each vision more horrific than the last. He saw glimpses of sailors who had been cast into the sea, dragged beneath the waves by unseen forces, condemned to drown in darkness. The ship wasn't just cursed, it was a collector of souls, bound by the promises of those who perished aboard it. Lucas staggered to the edge of the deck, his vision blurring as he clutched the railing, looking out into the endless, dark sea. There, just below the surface, he saw hundreds of faces of those trapped in the cold, black water, their mouths open in silent screams. He realized that they were watching him, waiting for him to join them in their eternal nightmare. But then he remembered the words of the old sailor who had warned him. The curse can only be lifted if you face the spirits. Summoning every ounce of strength left in him, Lucas turned back to the crew's ghostly figures, his voice barely a whisper. "Tell me, how can I break the curse?" The captain stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the darkness of the sea. "To break the curse, you must free us," he said. "But freeing us means you take our place." Lucas felt a surge of panic. He'd come to escape the curse, not to become its next victim. But as he looked into the hollow, despairing faces of the lost sailors, he understood that there was no escape for him now. Only a choice. He could leave them, knowing he'd be haunted forever, or he could make the ultimate sacrifice. As he weighed his options, the whispers grew louder, more frantic, pleading for release. The spirits gathered around him, their eyes filled with a desperate, haunting hope. And in that moment, Lucas knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he spoke the words that would seal his fate. "I'll stay," he whispered, "but let them go." The air stilled. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, one by one, the spirits began to fade, their tortured faces softening, released from their curse at last. The captain gave Lucas a nod of solemn respect as his own form dissolved into the mist, leaving Lucas alone on the deck. With a heavy heart, Lucas felt himself merging with the ship, becoming part of its cursed essence. He was now the Sea Widow's keeper, condemned to wander the dark waters, waiting for the next lost soul to board and free him from his own haunting fate. And so they say, the Sea Widow still drifts through the foggy seas, an empty vessel with only a single figure on its deck. A figure with hollow eyes, waiting, watching, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to seek out the truth and release him from the curse. Now tell me, would you be brave enough to board the Sea Widow if it meant freeing the lost souls? Or would the fear of joining them forever keep you from setting foot on that cursed ship? Share your answer below, and remember, some mysteries of the sea are best left unsolved. As the Sea Widow drifted through the foggy waters, Lucas felt a strange calm settle over him, though he was now bound to the ship's eternal curse. His mind was filled with the sorrowful memories of the countless sailors who had suffered under the same fate. He tried to recall the faces of his crew, the ones he had left behind to return to this forsaken ship. But their features grew distant, blurred, like images in a fading dream. All that remained was the sea, stretching endlessly around him, and the ship's faint, ominous creaks that echoed like ghostly sighs. Days and nights blurred together as he sailed through mist and darkness, drawn by forces he couldn't see, but could somehow sense. He was no longer a mere man. He was part of the Sea Widow, bound to its planks and sails, cursed to roam until another soul dared to set foot on its deck and release him. Time passed, and the world outside moved on, but Lucas remained, a shadow on an empty ship. Years, perhaps centuries, drifted by. Lucas became accustomed to the haunting silence and the isolation, but he never stopped hoping that someday someone would come and free him. He found himself whispering into the mist, calling to the sailors he could sense on the horizon. The sea became his only companion, its depths holding secrets darker than he had ever imagined. And then, one cold, moonless night, he saw something through the dense fog. The lights of a ship approaching. A glimmer of hope flickered within him, a chance for release. The ship grew closer, and Lucas stood at the bow, watching as its shadowy figure came into view. He felt the pull, an almost magnetic force drawing him toward the vessel. As it neared, he saw faces on the deck, sailors peering into the mist with anxious expressions, as if they sensed the presence of the Sea Widow lurking nearby. He tried to call out to them, but his voice had become as faint as the wind. The sailors glanced around, whispering to one another, eyes wide with fear. One of them, A young man with a determined gaze looked directly at Lucas. For a brief moment, it seemed as though he could see him, as if he were staring into the very depths of his soul. Lucas tried to communicate, his thoughts reaching out like tendrils of mist, pleading for the stranger to board the cursed ship. But the young sailor shook his head, backing away, his face pale. He turned to his crew, whispering hurriedly, and they steered away, leaving the Sea Widow alone once more. Lucas's hope crumbled into despair as he watched the ship disappear into the fog, leaving him trapped in eternal solitude yet again. Years passed, and the curse held its grip over him, each passing moment stretching into an endless, haunting eternity. Lucas began to lose all sense of self, becoming a mere shadow within the fog, his memories fading into the endless night. And still, the sea whispered to him, a constant reminder of his fate. Every so often he would see a flicker of light in the distance, another ship daring to venture close, and he'd reach out, hoping someone might be brave enough to board and free him. To this day, sailors tell stories of the Sea Widow, of the lone figure seen standing on its deck, staring out across the waters, waiting. Some say it's the ghost of a captain who betrayed his crew, while others believe it's a soul who sacrificed himself to release those trapped in the curse. But all agree on one thing: the ship is an omen of doom, and those who see it are wise to turn away. Only the foolish would dare board it, for those who do may find themselves bound to its curse, trapped forever in its unending journey through the fog. And so, the Sea Widow sails on, an eternal ghost ship with Lucas aboard, waiting, hoping that one day someone brave enough will set foot on its cursed deck and finally set him free from the curse's relentless grip. But until then, he remains, a silent shadow in the mist, haunted by the whispers of the sea. As Lucas stood, a solitary figure on the phantom ship's deck, time lost all meaning. The waves beneath him rolled in a rhythmic lullaby of dread, whispering tales of forgotten souls and sailors lost to the dark. His thoughts blended with the shadows, twisted memories of his past life, seeping through the cracks of his consciousness. He could feel the ship pulsing with life, or something like it, a sentient force woven into every plank, every creak. It wasn't just a vessel, it was an entity, one that thrived on fear and fed off souls too bold or too curious to turn away. One misty dawn, as the faint light of day struggled to pierce the dense fog, Lucas spotted another ship on the horizon. His hollowed heart lurched with hope and fear, knowing that this could mean another chance at freedom, or another cruel reminder of his endless fate. This ship was different, though. It had an air of defiance about it, a silent determination that set it apart from the others that had turned away. As it drifted closer, Lucas could make out the crew on deck, their faces blurred yet resolute. One figure caught his eye, a young woman, her gaze fierce and unyielding, as if she could feel his presence, sense the darkness that clung to the Sea Widow. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, Lucas felt a strange shift. She wasn't looking at him with fear, but with something almost like recognition. The young woman turned to her crew, speaking in hushed tones. Lucas couldn't hear her words, but the crew's nervous glances toward the cursed ship said it all. They were hesitant, but her unwavering resolve seemed to overpower their doubt. She was determined, even as the mist thickened, as the eerie silence settled over them. Lucas's mind raced, trapped between hope and despair. Who was this woman? Why did she look at him as though she understood his fate? His spirit trembled, a faint echo of who he once was, clinging to a single thought. Perhaps she could end this, lift the curse, and set him free. As the woman's ship drew nearer, the fog around the Sea Widow thickened, as if trying to shield itself. protect its cursed secret from the prying eyes of the living. But the woman stood firm, undeterred, and called out into the silence, her voice steady. "Are you the one they speak of? The one bound to this ship?" she asked, her voice cutting through the mist like a blade. Lucas's voice was no more than a whisper, barely audible, yet somehow she seemed to hear him. "Yes, I am the one cursed to sail these waters." The woman took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "I came here to break the curse, but only if you tell me the truth. Who cursed you? Why does this ship claim so many souls?" For the first time in centuries, Lucas felt something other than despair. This woman was different, driven by a fierce curiosity, a hunger for answers that matched his own long-lost resolve. He knew he couldn't lie. This was his only chance, and the truth was his last tether to humanity. It was betrayal, Lucas said, his voice thick with the weight of his confession. "The crew, my friends. I let them down, abandoned them to the depths to save myself. But the sea has a way of punishing cowards. The Sea Widow cursed me, bound me to her, to wander these waters until my debt was paid." The woman's expression softened, but her determination did not waver. "Then tell me, how do I free you? Is there a way to break this cycle?" Lucas hesitated, the fear clawing at him. He had spent countless years trapped, wishing for this moment, and now that it was here, he realized he didn't know if freedom was truly possible. But he clung to a single hope, a desperate gamble. "You must take my place," he whispered. "Only by binding your soul to the Sea Widow can you release mine. But know this, the ship will demand a price. It always does." The woman paused, her face unreadable. The crew behind her murmured in anxious whispers, but she silenced them with a glance. She stepped forward, her hand reaching toward the Sea Widow, as though she could already feel the weight of the curse pressing down upon her. "I accept," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes held a hint of fear. "I will take your place." A strange calm settled over Lucas, a peace he hadn't felt in centuries. As the woman crossed the invisible boundary, her fate sealed, he felt the ship release its grip on him, felt himself unraveling, fading into the mist. But just before he vanished, he whispered one final warning. "Beware. The sea never forgets." And with that, Lucas disappeared, leaving the woman alone on the deck of the Sea Widow, the new keeper of its endless curse, bound to wander the seas, awaiting the next soul daring or foolish enough to seek her out. Now, the legend of the Sea Widow lives on, and they say, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint whisper of Lucas's warning drifting across the waves. Would you dare approach the ghost ship, knowing it holds the souls of the damned? Or would you turn back, leaving its secrets lost in the mist forever? Share your answer below, if you dare. As the days turned into nights aboard the Sea Widow, the young woman, now the ship's new keeper, felt the weight of her choice pressing down on her. The crew, once eager to explore the mysteries of the ocean, now stood frozen in fear, their eyes darting nervously toward her. They could sense the change in the air, the ship's ominous presence pulsating like a heartbeat beneath their feet. At first, the woman tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but it quickly became apparent that the Sea Widow was not just a ship. It was a living entity that thrived on despair. Whispers echoed in the night, eerie voices calling to her from the depths, tales of those who had come before her, their spirits eternally bound to the cursed vessel. Every night, the fog rolled in thicker than before, and shadows danced along the deck, twisting and turning in a macabre waltz. The young woman felt them watching, felt their pain echoing within her. Each day became a battle against the consuming darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. She could no longer distinguish between her thoughts and the whispers of the trapped souls, each one urging her to let go, to give in to despair. But she was determined. If Lucas had sacrificed himself to free her, then she would find a way to break the curse once and for all. She began to explore the ship, delving into its hidden chambers, uncovering secrets long forgotten. There were ancient maps, tattered journals filled with tales of shipwrecks and betrayal, and tokens left behind by those who had once sailed these treacherous waters. Then, one stormy night, as lightning illuminated the darkened sky, she stumbled upon a hidden room deep within the bowels of the Sea Widow. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, pulsating with an otherworldly glow. At the center of the room lay a chest, bound in rusted chains, its surface etched with the names of sailors who had come before her. With trembling hands, she opened the chest, revealing a glowing crystal that pulsed with energy. This was the heart of the ship, the source of its power. She understood now. To break the curse, she had to confront the very thing that had imprisoned so many souls before her. But doing so would require a sacrifice greater than she could have ever imagined. As she held the crystal, she felt the weight of countless souls pressing upon her, their grief and sorrow washing over her like a tide. She knew that to set them free, she would have to merge her essence with the ship, becoming a part of it for eternity. In that moment, she made her decision. She would not let their sacrifices be in vain. She would not allow the cycle of suffering to continue. With a deep breath, she placed the crystal back into the chest and began to chant the incantation she had deciphered from the journals. The ship trembled, a low moan echoing through the water, as if the Sea Widow itself understood her intent. The mist thickened around her, swirling with fury, but she stood her ground. The winds howled, the sea roared, and for a brief moment, she could see the faces of the lost sailors appearing around her, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. They reached out, their hands brushing against her, their whispers becoming a chorus of hope. "Set us free," they cried, their voices blending into a powerful storm. With one final shattering scream, the ship erupted in a blinding light, the crystal at its core shattering into 1,000 pieces. The darkness that had enveloped them began to dissipate, and she felt herself pulled into the light, the warmth enveloping her like a comforting embrace. In an instant, she was no longer alone. The souls of the lost sailors surrounded her, their laughter ringing in her ears as they ascended into the heavens, freed at last from their torment. She had done it. She had broken the curse. But as she began to fade into the light, a part of her remained tethered to the Sea Widow, forever bound to the vessel that had once held her captive. She understood now that she would always be a guardian of the sea, watching over those who dared to traverse its treacherous depths. And so, the Sea Widow transformed into a beacon of hope, its ghostly form now a guiding light for lost sailors, leading them safely to shore. The legend would live on, whispering tales of bravery and sacrifice, reminding all who sailed the waters of the bond between the living and the dead. Now, if you ever find yourself out on the open sea, and you see a flicker of light piercing through the fog, remember this tale, for it might just be the Sea Widow guiding you home, or perhaps leading you into a deeper mystery. Would you dare to follow the light, or would you turn away, forever haunted by the questions left unanswered? Share your thoughts below, and remember, the sea always holds its secrets close.